Now Channel 2 Action News investigates small plane crashes where the engine just actually stops mid-flight. They've been happening for decades. We've been covering them. Critics of federal regulators contend it's because of design flaw in thousands of planes. Channel 2 investigative reporter Justin Gray reports for us now that this all centers around fuel tanks with some of the most popular planes up in the sky.
That's the runway right there where I crashed.
Luis Leon says the engine in his small plane, a Cessna, simply stopped in midair that day in 2015.
Next thing I remember, I was awake, not fully conscious, at a hospital nearby.
This was his first trip back to the Kissimmee airport since the crash. He's not even flown since. The NTSB, in its official findings, determined Leon was at fault for not properly checking for water in his fuel tanks.
I was like, what are they talking about?
We dug through National Transportation Safety Board reports and found 160 Cessna accidents where water was found in the fuel. 8 were fatal crashes. Here's video of an Arkansas pilot's takeoff, just 9 seconds in the air before the engine went out. The pilot says he checked for water, telling investigators, quote, "I don't know how we could have been any safer than we were." Investigators found substantial water. And there are others: Jasper, Georgia, South Carolina, Washington State, New Jersey. The list goes on and on. All loss of engine power from water in the fuel. We spoke to several other pilots by phone, but none wanted to talk on camera. That may be because in virtually all of the accidents, the NTSB puts the blame squarely on the pilot.
Cannot just be pilot error.
Bob Scoville has kept this hangar and maintained his Cessna 172 20 years since he last flew it, because Scoville believes he knows what is causing these crashes.
It's taking lives, pilots' lives, their passengers.
Scoville says he is confident it's not pilot error. Why won't you fly that plane?
The fuel tanks are severely flawed.
It's called sumping the fuel. That's how small plane pilots check for water. If they see a layer of water below fuel, it's not safe to fly. But Scoville says his years of research show water can hide in these wing fuel tanks.
Depending on what maneuvers you make, the water ends up going to the engine pickup. The engine sputters, ceases operation, and gravity takes over.
Scoville has experienced it firsthand, 3 separate times after 17 years flying with no problem.
The engine just quit on me, and I glided to an airport, and that's the last time I ever flew it.
Scoville got the attention of the FAA, who witnessed several experiments. These are photos from one of those tests. 32 ounces of water, dyed red, poured into the tanks to see what it does. An FAA memo shows how after sumping, even shaking the wings, 13 ounces of water remained entrapped inside the tank. Then FAA supervisor Larry Williams, who's now retired, was alarmed. When you look at this with your years of training, your years of experience, do you think this is a problem on more planes than Bob's?
It appears that way. There's too many unexplained engine stops and engine failures.
Soon after, the FAA sent this letter to Cessna determining, quote, an unsafe condition exists and design changes are necessary. The paper trail essentially ends in 2001 until 2007, when FAA sent Cessna this letter, reversing its findings, giving the planes a clean bill of health, writing that there was no reaction of test flight engines to water contamination, saying based on those tests, their original concerns and warnings were, quote, incorrect. With that letter, FAA closed the case. No design changes were mandated, but planes have kept crashing, like this demolished Cessna in a Florida parking lot from 2017. Again, the pilot saying he, quote, sumped several times. Larry Williams says even a small amount of water in the engine is dangerous.
2 or 3 ounces would probably shut an engine down.
And Bob Scoville showed us, using simply some water with red dye, how that water stays in these wing fuel tanks. You can see here after a few sumps, the fuel is clear of water in our test. But take a look inside. That red dye water is collecting and hiding around the tank.
Water just lays in the bottom of the tank.
In a series of recent airworthiness information bulletins, FAA essentially agreed with that concern, telling pilots first of Cessnas, then all small planes of what it termed, quote, hazards associated with water contamination of fuel tank systems. The pilots, quote, should assume some water exists in the fuel tank system of the airplane. But FAA maintains that this airworthiness concern is not an unsafe condition and suggests sumping multiple locations in your fuel tank to be safe. That's something pilots who have survived an engine failure say is not enough.
Something needs to be done, I think.
And so while Bob Scoville keeps what was his pride and joy locked up on the ground, he continues to push for action from federal regulators.
I loved aviation, but I'm never going to be done as long as I'm breathing to try to give my fellow aviators a heads up that they have a potential life-taking flaw in their aircraft.
A Cessna spokesperson tells us Scoville's theory was carefully investigated and tested by Cessna with direct FAA participation, also oversight. They say no safety concerns were found to exist and the matter was closed by the FAA.